49ers have made some changes on defense. Nick Sorensen, Brandon Staley. Is that also going to be meaning a difference in defensive philosophy? Me getting into a deep dive about the 49ers defense, where it's headed, what it's going to look like in 2024, all that and more in this episode of 49ers Cutback.
From the alley-oops at Keysar to the glory days at the stick. From who's got it better than us to brick by brick. It's always the 49ers way. From off-season to game day. Yeah, we talk back. It's the 49ers Cutback.
It's 49ers Cutback podcast time. Welcome to the show, everyone. So excited to talk about this. I've been doing research, looking into the 49ers defense over the last several years, but also looking into Nick Sorensen and Brandon Staley and getting a clear picture on what the defensive philosophy is going to look like in San Francisco. Because there was a big change from years following with Robert Saleh, D'Amico Ryans to what we got last year with Steve Wilks. And you can only assume that the defense is going to change because the 49ers decided that they were going to move on from Steve Wilks after the Super Bowl. And Steve Wilks did things a little bit differently than what had been done in the past within this defense. And we had heard it when he was hired that there was only going to be subtle tweaks and subtle changes, but the overall philosophy and belief of the 49ers defense was going to remain the same. Of course, we know there was more changes than we anticipated. Things looked a lot different, and results followed that formula. Results were different. There were moments and times where Steve Wilks' defense looked absolutely fantastic, and it looked like the 49ers defense of old shutting people down and possibly even being better in the secondary. And then there were times where it looked like this defense was really bad. They were struggling to stop the run up the middle. At times, they were struggling to stop run on the edge. At times, they couldn't stop quarterbacks from completing underneath passes like week 2 with Matthew Stafford. And we kept believing Steve Wilks is eventually going to figure this thing out. He's going to get a firm grip on his players, the philosophy, the way that the 49ers run their scheme, and he's going to figure it out. He's an experienced coach. He's going to make it happen. Unfortunately, it didn't. When the big moments came, the big results didn't. And he wasn't able to get the big-time stops when he needed them. And so Kyle Shanahan decided that it wasn't a move that he wanted to stick with and keep Steve Wilks. And so we usher in a new regime, but a regime that has been a part of this 49ers organization already with Nick Sorensen. And with Sorensen, that means opportunity to come in and put his stamp on a 49ers defense, but probably turn back to what we saw. So we're going to take a look at Nick Sorensen's defense, of course, what his identity of what he expects his defense to be, how much that correlates with Robert Saleh, D'Amico Ryans, and also what Brandon Staley is going to bring as well. We're also going to hit on some of the things that Steve Wilks' defense struggled with that the 49ers have obviously recognized and are looking to address, and Nick Bosa and Fred Warner speak about Nick Sorensen and speak about what things is going to be different from what we got last year from Steve Wilks to what we're going to get from Nick Sorensen. The one common denominator, the 49ers players like Nick Sorensen. They like that he was in the building. Whether you hear it from Hufanga, Jair Brown, Fred Warner, or Nick Bosa, they all say the same thing. So they're signing off on Nick Sorensen. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. If you're listening audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe, please give it a 5-star rating. If you're going to bet with Bet Online. Bet Online is your world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything online sports betting. Right now, you can receive a 50% free bet up to $250 on your first deposit to bet on anything from the Olympics to baseball to Formula One racing. Bet Online has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. Bet online, the game starts here. And so, first thing we have to do is look at how the defense changed under Coach Steve Wilks. And it definitely did. You can notice subtle changes. And of course, if you're watching the All 22 film and you are reevaluating every single game, you notice nuances and small differences. And you could tell just with some of the communication between Steve Wilks and cornerbacks. One of the ones that definitely tipped off on something that was different from what Saleh and D'Amico did, a simple coverage fact, was the fact that when Jason Verrett came in and he gave up a touchdown, and Steve Wilks said, oh, he didn't use the right technique. He's supposed to be chest to chest in the end zone. And of course, that's a different technique. It's a great technique. You go chest to chest and you're playing the player, and that way you're not looking back at the quarterback and losing track of that player along the back of the end zone. Jason Verrett has been playing in this league for a long time, and that wasn't a technique he had normally ran and definitely didn't run for the San Francisco 49ers. So that was a little small variance of something Steve Wilks brought, a very sound technique as far as coverage. And you've seen Charvarius Ward be able to illustrate that a lot of times during the season, but just a hint of a subtle change that Steve Wilks made to the defense. What are some of the other things that he did? Well, we know about the new techniques in defense and the secondary, including that. There were also some new footwork. Some of the angles at which the players lined up pre-snap were different. Charvarius Ward talked about that a lot last season. Then also different looks in blitz packages. He definitely liked a lot of zone blitz type looks, which was a little bit different from what D'Amico Ryans had done and Robert Saleh. Their blitzes were more unique and a little bit different than the way that you went along with Steve Wilks. And also different usages in coverage, just the way that he called coverage. He called different things at different times that were different compared to what D'Amico did or Saleh. And the truth is, D'Amico ran different coverages than Robert Saleh did as far as frequency and on what down. So there's always subtle changes depending on your personnel, what team you're playing, but overall philosophy of the defensive coordinator. They're not going to be all the same. You're just hoping that they're going to stay somewhat the same. So the simplicity in looks and coverage and play was a big difference from what you got from D'Amico Ryans in 2022, especially the end of 2022 and the 21 and the 2022 season, where D'Amico Ryans changed things up. 2023 with Steve Wilks was significantly different. So when you look at what the 49ers did under Robert Saleh, you see that they were very efficient in pass. They were 9th best efficiency in defensive rush rate. They were 5th, and this is without Bosa, without Solomon Thomas, and some of the players that are missing down the stretch there. But they ran a base cover 3 and quarters. Is that going to change? We're going to get into that in a second. And then their third downs, they ran mostly blitz and cover 1. And cover 1, of course, is the most predominantly run coverage in the entire NFL, especially on third down. Well, D'Amico Ryans is of course, took over that defense, and he changed it up. So the first part of D'Amico Ryans taking over in 2021, he ran a lot of what Robert Saleh did until he got his footing on what he wanted to do. So that means on those downs, he ran cover 1 at 22.2% over the first 11 weeks. Then in week 12 and through the divisional round of the playoffs, he ran it 13.9%, a 9% drop. So 49ers didn't use man coverage under either defensive coordinator, Robert Saleh or D'Amico Ryans. That's not something the 49ers do. They use a lot of things when it comes to zone coverage. And they like to use the strength of their defense, which is being the pass rush. And they like to match routes with integrity from inside out. So they are really good with their zone drops and matching routes inside out, which is a key. It's something we're going to get into because D'Amico Ryans changed his philosophy and really got his philosophy installed compared to what Robert Saleh did. And part of the reason I'm revealing a lot about what D'Amico did and that transition of 2021-22 defense compared to what Steve Wilks did in 2023 is I'm illustrating there's going to be a return to that philosophy, but it'll probably have Nick Sorensen's spin on it. The same way you had an evolving defense from Robert Saleh to D'Amico Ryans, you should have an evolving defense from D'Amico Ryans to Nick Sorensen. I think Kyle Shanahan believed the defense would evolve under Steve Wilks with some unique looks and some different things that would help the 49ers be able to handle current offenses a little bit better. That didn't happen. So now they got to get back on track by going back to what D'Amico did and then now taking it from there. Nick Sorensen has been pegged as the guy to do it. So middle out into stout was the philosophy that really got D'Amico Ryans and the 49ers defense going very, very well. So he wanted more variance in terms of how Fred Warner was going to be deployed and more emphasis on interceptions and forced fumbles, creating more impact. That's the same sort of thing we saw roll over into last season. Fred Warner, once again, all around the ball, fumble recoveries, interceptions. The use of Fred Warner is important. That middle out to stout into stout is something that you heard the players referring to. One of the reasons that I'm discussing this is last year we talked about the differences for Talanoa Hufanga. 2022, he's an all-pro player. He's all over the place, having great success. Well, middle out is what makes you very successful if you're a safety or a linebacker, because you're covering the middle, you're taking care of that the most, and then you're forcing everything to the outside, which changed a lot last year. It wasn't the same philosophy. Of course, Fred did Fred things, but Talanoa Hufanga and some of the interior guys struggled a little bit. Teams were able to throw to the middle of the field more than they were able to under D'Amico Ryans. So getting back to that's going to be important. But it also somewhat changed how Dre Greenlaw was used. And so that's some of the things that you need to do. I mean, some games, Fred Warner was coming on blitzes from every angle. And then he would drop him into coverage exclusively compared to Dre Greenlaw. So they changed that up a little bit. So the Niners defense started in the middle and spread outward. What did that do? That freed up Bosa. And Bosa had 18.5 sacks. So the way that the 49ers ran defense under D'Amico Ryans and that inside-out mentality actually helped Nick Bosa be able to get home and have more sacks. What did we keep hearing the players say last year? Tying the front to the back end. This is kind of the things that they're referring to. Now, while Bosa's having a career year with this philosophy, Fred Warner is becoming only the 5th linebacker in NFL history to have 100 tackles and is in his first 5 seasons. So he's been being absolutely versatile in his role. So he's just so good at what he can do. Now, Fred Warner did tip his cap to D'Amico Ryans for this philosophy and helping them become the best. He said, "What does greatness look like? It wore a headset and fist pumped on the sidelines. Sometimes it called out an offense's plays before they ran them." And that's just great coaching, right? D'Amico understood what the opposing team was going to do before they did it and called accordingly. And the fact that that happened was extremely important. The 49ers forced more turnovers than any team in the NFL in that season, D'Amico's last season in the NFL. But here's where the differences are extremely different between what D'Amico Ryans did with basically the same group of defensive players compared to what Steve Wilks did. They did not allow a single player to surpass 100 rushing yards in a game. 69 by the Raiders. Josh Jacobs was the most anyone got in 2022. They led the league in DVOA, which is an efficiency metric, right? And then Hufanga became a star, and Deommodore Lenoir developed into a really, really good player. So it's one of those things that he added. Now, what were something that Ryan's philosophy was, because philosophy is going to be a big part of this conversation with Nick Sorensen, is he had special work ethic and relentless mindset, or swarm. That was his philosophy, and he just stuck with it. And the defense held the 49ers into the season early on in that year where they really struggled and were dealing with the injuries to Trey Lance, eventually Jimmy Garoppolo, but the defense never wavered. So 49ers have been consistent in the coverages and type of coverages they run. They run the cover 3, the cover 4, and of course, off of that, you have the different variations of matchup zones, being able to drop with guys. And I think the 49ers are looking to get back to that attacking style of defense. But I also think they're looking to get back to that inside-out mentality that created great opportunities for Nick Bosa and created great opportunities for Talanoa Hufanga, Fred Warner, and Dre Greenlaw to go be great. And I think that last year that was lost a little bit in Steve Wilks' philosophy. Some of the subtle changes, some of the focus. And you got to look at it from who also the coach is. When you have Steve Wilks, this is a guy that's normally a secondary coach. His approach to seeing defense is from the back end. That's how he sees defense. And that's okay. There's been a lot of guys who see it that way. And some of the better defensive coordinators have been a secondary background. But DeMeco Ryans and Robert Saleh came from a linebacker mentality. And so look at DeMeco Ryans. When he gets this defense to the top level that it can be, he's getting it there by using his own understanding of linebacker play and then using Fred and using the guys that he knows are extremely talented to have great success. And they benefit from it. Dre Greenlaw, great year. Fred Warner, great year. Hufanga, all-pro season. Nick Bosa, defensive player of the year. All of them have success because he understands how to use them within this defense. DeMeco Ryans doing that. Now it's Nick Sorensen's job to try to take it to the next level. And of course, first you got to find out, what is he going to do to go back to that philosophy? Is he going to go back? Does he have his own philosophy? Well, I think you can't come out there and just say point blank, we're going to do what DeMeco did. You want to set your own tone, but you want to have a similar thought process. Here is what Coach Nick Sorensen had to say about his identity on defense.
What's going to be the identity of your defense?
I want them to see that we're still the standard of what we've always been, an attacking defense that plays fast, we play violent, we play with speed, and we finish.
I mean, right, it's aggressiveness. He wants them to finish. He's going ahead and starting to put forth that mentality that was the staple of the 49ers defense. When you had Robert Saleh, it was all gas, no brakes. When it was DeMeco Ryans, it was swarm. It's a mentality of attack, never give up, never quit. What is one of the things that was questioned last season during the year was the 49ers hustle. Never before, under any defensive coordinator in San Francisco, had the 49ers been questioned about their hustle and about getting after the ball carrier. And that's something that definitely changed under Steve Wilks. And it doesn't mean Wilks believed that, because Wilks definitely didn't. We heard him talk about that's never acceptable to have lack of hustle when it comes to the NFL player. But NFL players, like all players, have to be reminded consistently what is the focus, what is the thought process. I mean, Nick Sorensen handled ball meetings every single week. Well, ball meetings are about getting that football. The football is the most important thing. And you go over it every week because you want it fresh in their minds. So making sure you have a clear vision of what you want your defense to do and then reiterating that in every essence of the defense is so important. They want to know what the philosophy is, and it has to be ingrained into them what it's going to be. And that's what you're going to do. You're going to get that, our bread and butter, what it is, be aggressive. That's what you want from Nick Sorensen. But don't just take it from me. Also, let's listen to what Fred Warner has to say about it. Fred Warner is going to talk about Nick Sorensen just as far as his reference, but he's going to give an idea of getting back to the 49ers style.
Yeah, I think the thing that we've always prided ourselves on is the style in which we play, right? Like you can talk about scheme all day long of, trying to shore up the little things and the details of how we operate in our scheme. But, I mean, style has got to show through and through every single play. And so, obviously, right now, OTAs, we can't show off that physicality and violence that we play with. But, I mean, the effort part has been something that we've harped on from the beginning of OTAs. And I've loved seeing the guys coming out of the stack, everybody running to the football. I mean, that's the standard. It's always been the standard, but you have to be reminded of that every single year or else it does fade, if it's not continue to be a area of focus. So I think everybody's going in the right direction right now.
You're getting back to something, it means you got away from it a little bit. And the fact that is being preached right now during the offseason, and it's going to be preached in training camp, and we're almost in training camp right now, it's a focus of this 49ers defense. Nick Sorensen's coming in with a clear, concise idea of what he wants this defense to look like. And he's going to build it off of what the former defensive coordinators built. Robert Saleh built it a certain way. DeMeco Ryans took it to another level. And now it's Nick Sorensen's turn to take that baton. And I know there's a year of separation between D'Amico Ryans and Nick Sorensen, but Sorensen was here. He was in the meetings. He was just talking to these players. They all have great respect for him. And which means if you have great respect for him, they're going to listen to him. They understand where he's coming from. But what he did was take his mindset, what he did as a secondary player in the NFL, and be able to apply it as a coach. So when it comes to Sorensen, even though he played secondary, what was one of the things he's done over the last 2 years? Well, first off, when Coach Johnny Hollins unfortunately was dealing with his cancer, Nick Sorensen coached linebackers. And why does that make sense for the 49ers, him coaching linebackers? Because every single day he coached nickel corners. And nickel corners have to work with linebackers when it comes to run fits. They work in tandem when it comes to coverages. There's a lot of things that are intertwined. So when you're talking about a defensive coordinator, this isn't a guy just seeing it from the secondary, but a guy that's been in the mix, that has to understand what the defensive linemen are doing so his nickel corner can have the right run fit. That has to understand what the linebackers are doing so he can have the right run fit. He has to work in tandem with Coach Chris Kasarik and with Johnny Holland and with Daniel Bullock. So he's already been in the mix. And so that's why I think he has a firm belief and a firm grasp on what D'Amico Ryans was doing, inward out philosophy. And that's what the 49ers need to go back to. That's what makes Fred Warner the best Fred Warner. That makes Dre Greenlaw the best Dre Greenlaw. That makes Talanoa Hufanga the best Talanoa Hufanga that he can be. And so when there were changes in Hufanga's production last year, how much of it was Hufanga struggling and how much of it was a change in philosophy? Well, I think that's going to be something that's going to be answered this year. Players are going to go back to the way things were under D'Amico Ryans with some subtle changes, of course, and we're going to get into all of that as well. Now, one of the things that was definitely clear and apparent this season was that coverages just didn't feel the same. There were definitely times that it felt like the defensive backs were playing further off, allowing catches underneath. I think that Rams week 2 was very evident of that. The Cincinnati Bengals game against Joe Burrow, it felt like throws were able to happen underneath and they were just rallying to make tackles. It could be frustrating for a 49ers fan watching that happen. And it was a philosophy difference between Steve Wilks and D'Amico Ryans, where D'Amico Ryans would force things. He would put pressure on you. He would give you different looks, and he would just add a certain way of coverage working. Well, Coach Nick Sorensen talked about the coverage just a tiny bit and what they need to do to go from what happened last year to what could happen in the future and what they need to go to do about fixing coverage for the 49ers.
I mean, it's just, the details of what we've done in the past, with just our coverages and how we play them. That's it.
Got to go back to what they're doing. They got to go back to the way they did it before. And so they've got to reverse some of the techniques that were taught. And how many of those guys did it work for? Well, it looked at moments like guys like Ambry Thomas got a little bit better, but there was inconsistencies. Charvarius Ward, he got his hands on the football more than ever, but you attribute that to Steve Wilks or Nick Sorensen, who's handling ball drills. It's an interesting proposition, which one happened. But I think the 49ers saw that there were holes, and Nick Sorensen also talked about the run game, and he said there was things that they saw that they need to fix. But what it feels like is there were holes in what the defense was doing last season. Steve Wilks had a particular set of ideals that he wanted to add to this 49ers defense of his own ideals, and that's okay. You want to bring in your own flavor when you're going into a defense. You feel like you just add things here and there, you sprinkle some things in that you can take the defense to another level. But sometimes if you're not paying attention to the overall scheme or you don't understand the scheme, those things you bring in don't fit the way they should. And they leave holes, they leave gaps in the jobs and responsibilities of the team. And that's when you start hearing things like, oh yeah, it's not tied together. The front is not tied to the back because there's little holes now in the scheme. And that's the struggle. One of the things you always have to do is make sure that what you're bringing in fits your scheme first. If it doesn't, get rid of it. It has to work in concert with the rest. So if you can make it work, if you can adjust it so it fits your scheme, then by all means run it. If it's going to make your players better, by all means run it. But if it's not, you can't do that. So here's a case where you had probably Steve Wilks' defense's philosophy as far as secondary not coinciding what the 49ers scheme said it should be. And he tried to make it work. But unfortunately, it just didn't. And so they have to fix coverages. And that's one of the things you definitely have to do. And one of the things and one of the complaints about the San Francisco 49ers defense in 2023 under Steve Wilks was that it seemed hyper vanilla. It seemed like whatever you saw pre-snap, you were getting post-snap. And teams were able to take advantage of that at times. Now, I will give Steve Wilks props. When he did give a look and then change post-snap, it sometimes worked exceptionally well. You look at the NFC Championship game, it happened a couple times in the second half to Jared Goff. He gave him a look that showed man coverage, and then he ran zone. And Dre Greenlaw was out wide. He thought he had a matchup that he really liked. Then when Goff looks at it, it's zone and it's not there, and he has to throw an errant pass. When he hit on those, he hit on them. The problem was there wasn't enough variance, there wasn't enough aggressiveness, and there just wasn't enough, skill there to make it work. Well, one of the things that was asked was to Brandon Staley, and Brandon Staley is going to be a big part of this defense now that he has a holistic view of what the 49ers do on defense. He's here to work in concert with Nick Sorensen. He has all the experience in the world of being a defensive coordinator, being a head coach, and so he can apply that to helping Nick Sorensen, game planning, and also coming up with different looks. Two minds are always better than one, and you've got a guy that's been a very successful defensive coordinator in this league for a while. So he talked about that a little bit. He's talking about pre-snap, post-snap, and everything being tied together. Here is what Brandon Staley had to say about the 49ers defense pre and post snap.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to have enough flexibility within your defense to take advantage of your players, because it starts with your defense. But then you're always trying to make it tough on the offense post snap. The best players in the league, best coaches in the league, post snap, pre snap, if they know exactly what's happening, then you're multiplying their chances of being successful. And so you got to make them operate post-snap. I think, it's such a scheme world now where, every play is on a can, and, and there's a reason for that, so that they can, call plays against ideal looks. So you're trying to present different looks. And if you're going to do that, and if you're going to play different stuff, whether it's front coverage pressure, you got to make sure it's tied together. And the only way that's going to happen is if, as a unit, you have command over it. So you got to be able to teach conceptually, and you got to do what your guys can handle. And so,
you know what kind of players you have. You know how you have to use them, and you want to use them to the best of their abilities. And this is something that Brandon Staley's talking about that is very true about offenses in this league. They can plays now. And there was one play, as we just talked about, Coach Steve Wilks doing great as far as coverage. There's also a couple of plays that Detroit took advantage of him. The 49ers didn't adjust some of their pass rush schemes, and they were taken advantage of. One of them, very clearly, the 49ers overloaded one side of the defense, or one side of the offense, and left no one on the other side. And Jared Goff checked and was able to check into a run play to Jahmyr Gibbs on 3rd and 12 that produced a first down. That type of thing just can't happen. You can't give it away that easy. And if you're going to do something like that, you have to make sure that you have it built in for Fred to be able to change it, or you have to have it built in so that you don't see the look that early. And I think that's part of the problem is you got to make sure you're giving pre and post snaps that are different. You don't change them every single time, because then a quarterback's going to be looking for that. But you pick your opportunities. You say, you know what, I'm going to show him this coverage. I'm going to show him this look pre-snap, and then you run something different post-snap. Now, of course, just like Coach Staley said, you have to make sure it's tied together. You have to make sure it works. Defense works this way. The line, linebackers, and defensive backs all have to work in one accord. And it makes sense for them to all be on the same page. So you have to make sure that if they're starting from a certain position because of your look, they're able to get to where they're supposed to get in coverage. You have Fred Warner starting all the way on the offense's left side, and he's supposed to run flat coverage all the way on the other side. That doesn't make sense. If he's in man scheme and you've got him just over the center and he's supposed to cover a running back that's starting on the right side, that doesn't make sense. So making sure you tie things together and that you vary looks is very important because the league is getting so much better because, like Coach Staley said, they want to go against ideal looks. So if they can come up and get an ideal look at your coverage, then they can change the play to what they want to run with the can system. And so that's what's happening and was happening to the 49ers defense last year. D'Amico Ryans was brilliant when it come to giving different looks pre-snap and post-snap. Fantastic. From bringing blitzes from places you didn't think blitzes were coming from giving one look and then changing the game on what it actually was and who was coming. Not only does that make it more difficult for the quarterback, not only can it produce pressure, but it can also confuse an offensive line. And when you're starting to see ghosts as an offensive line, you think someone's coming in, they're not, that can completely change the entire play. All of a sudden you slide protect one way and pressure comes from the other. It can be extremely difficult, but you have to make sure you do that. Now, what are some of the things that Brandon Staley is going to bring to the table? Well, first off, that exact part. He's going to come with some exotic looks and some differences in the way that he's done things over the years and bring those into what Nick Sorensen does, where they can come with blitz packages and different unique looks when it comes to coverage and overall alignment to be able to produce some struggles for quarterbacks. What else does he bring? A defense that's always good on third down. Minus the 2021 season, which is his first year with the Los Angeles Chargers, his defense has been getting off the field very well. Teams only convert at just over 35% most of the time. Last year, the Chargers team was not good, yet the third down conversion rate against them was 38%. 49ers were over 40%. So it just shows you some of the effect that Brandon Staley could have, not Joe, Brandon Staley could have on this 49ers defense, and that's huge. Getting off the field on third down means less time that the offense has the ball, less time the defense is on the field, more opportunities for Brock Purdy and that potent offense to get something done. Even that 2% is great. Now, in 2020 with the Rams, when he had a really good, talented defense, that rate was 35%. Anything 35% or below is elite when it comes to third down conversion rate. So Brandon Staley brings that, even on bad football teams. So we might question him as a head coach, and that's fine. That's not what he's asked to do here. He's asked to bring in his methodology when it comes to getting off the field on third down, helping with pre-snap to post-snap reads, tying it together, and having a holistic view on what can happen. Plus, he's really good at cover 4 defense. He's done that at a high level, working with Coach Vic Fangio. So now you have the best of both worlds. Sorensen, the experience running that cover 3 for years with Seattle and running it with D'Amico. And, of course, cover 4 with D'Amico as well. And the Palms coverage, matching up and matching coverages. But now you get Staley that does it as well. And he's going to be working with the secondary. It's going to be huge. Now, what about the pass rush? I think this is something that's interesting when it comes to pass rush. And Brandon Staley was asked this question in one of the pressers. And I wasn't able to find the clip, but I did find him actually talking about it. So I'm going to read that here. He said, this group is known for its 4-man pass rush, but it has a lot of guys who can rush. And I think that's the key of a really good rush group. You have to have the threat of a lot of people rushing the passer. So he's talking about it. You have good 4 guys, but you got to be able to have a group of guys that are a threat of rushing the passer, which is what we have here. And that's why they've rushed the passer at such a high level since long before I got here. We have a good group of front guys, and that's what you want to be able to do in this league, regardless of what you play, what system you run, what coverages you play. If you can rush the passer with 4 guys, then you're feeling pretty good about your chances. And when you rush more than that, you're doing it because you want to, not because you have to. And I think that's the difference between what we had under D'Amico Ryans and what we had under Coach Steve Wilks. Under D'Amico Ryans, it felt like they did it because they wanted to. They wanted a 5th man or a 6th man putting pressure on the quarterback for a unique reason, to get him to speed up his clock, get rid of the football early. With Coach Steve Wilks, it almost felt like he had to. 49ers couldn't generate enough pass rush. Now, I think some of that relates to the scheme that Steve Wilks was running. And, of course, the 49ers have upgraded personnel, and that's going to be great for Nick Sorensen. But I think this is a clear picture that You need to make sure you have the guys that can do it, but you also have to make sure you continue to make the offense believe you have the threat of bringing more than 4. You might only bring 4, but the threat of 4 could be more. I think last year it didn't feel like that. It felt like we're just rushing 4. We're just rushing 4. We're just rushing 4. And then all of a sudden we have to rush more because we're not getting any pressure. So now we do it. It's more obvious. Less obvious, less vanilla, more aggressive. That's what we have to have. And Nick Bosa talks about a little bit about Sorensen and also just tying the front to the back. He's going to reiterate this. And I wanted to hear from Bosa because he's in the front lines. He will know about this especially. So here's Nick Bosa.
I knew him pretty well. He was always just a good dude around the facility. He did our ball meetings, so he's good in front of a group. He's a good leader. He knows the scheme really well, which is good. I was happy to see him promoted. He called me in the offseason. We talked. I just congratulated him, and I think he's going to bring something similar to what we had with D'Amico. So it'll be good.
When you say like similar to D'Amico, the energy or system?
Maybe a little different energy, but I think just knowing the system from the front to the back, I think he knows how it ties in, and he's been around with some really good coaches. So I think it'll be pretty seamless, and I think we'll be firing on all cylinders.
First off, he's a good leader, right? He called Nick Bosa. How smart is that by Coach Nick Sorensen? He reaches out to Nick Bosa and wants to talk ball with him, when he became the defensive coordinator. That's what you do. And I guarantee he called Fred. And I'm guarantee he called Talanoa Hufanga. I guarantee he called Charvarius Ward. It's that kind of leadership that's going to make an impression on those players. But like Nick Bosa said, he understands his defense. He's been here under D'Amico. And going back to that philosophy is what the 49ers players want. In fact, the 49ers never wanted to go away from that philosophy because they know what works. They've seen this defense develop from Robert Saleh to D'Amico Ryans and how it elevated and how it became its own living, breathing thing that was taking them to other heights. It was making Fred Warner an all-pro more than he even was, getting him in the Defensive Player of the Year conversation. It made Talanoa Hufanga an all-pro. It made Deommodore Lenoir a legitimate starter. It made Dre Greenlaw a potential Pro Bowler. It made Nick Bosa the Defensive Player of the Year. It elevated the players because it used their skill set to their best abilities. That's the name of the game. And that's exactly what Nick Sorensen and Brandon Staley are going to try to do this season. What are we going to see from the 49ers? Well, the change of philosophy is going back to what worked and then finding a way to continue to evolve it to another level. You have to continue to evolve in the league if you're going to grow. So we know what we're going to expect now from Nick Sorensen's defense. They're going to fly around. They're going to go make tackles. They're going to be aggressive and get after the football. They're going to have unique looks that produce pressure. They're going to play defense from the inside out. And they're going to make sure that Hufanga, Fred Warner, Drake Greenlaw, and Nick Bosa have the best opportunity to make plays for this football team. And they just want to keep you off balance every single day. That's what it's going to be about. Attention to detail, going back to doing things the right way, and executing at a high level, all the while making you think pre-snap and post-snap so it don't make it easy for you. It's going to be fun. Nick Sorensen's got a lot of weight on his shoulders right now. Good thing is he's got Brandon Staley to help pick him up, and he's got a really good football team with some talented all-pro caliber players to help him. So the defensive philosophy, it is a changing from what Steve Wilkes did last year, and it's going back to what we ran with D'Amico Ryans in 2022. Will there be variances and changes? Absolutely. And hopefully the evolution takes this 49ers defense to a whole other level than we've ever seen before. And if that is the case, 49ers defense has a really good chance of being a top 1, top 2, top 3 defense in this league, potentially even helping the 49ers get over the top in the biggest moments. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of 49ers Cutback. Please let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Really appreciate it. If you're listening audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe. Please give it a 5-star rating. This episode is brought to you by Bet Online. The game starts here. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Until then, stay safe. And remember, the right way is always the 49ers way.